combat, technology, zombies. These are three influential words shaping the current landscape of pop culture. They have also impacted the powerful three-word franchise which has echoed through gaming lore for the past decade: Call of Duty. Since its inception, Call of Duty has taken the gaming world by force by transporting gamers to the legendary battlefields of World War II, all the way to futuristic story worlds loaded with advanced weaponry and machinery. And now, Treyarch, the award-winning development team behind the successful Black Ops series, continues their storied tradition of mixing gritty, dark narrative with cutting-edge gameplay through their upcoming release, Call of Duty Black Ops 3. A gigantic and futuristic world where enhanced breeds of soldiers emerge and where lines are blurred between our own humanity and the cutting-edge military robotics that may just define the future of combat. The campaign promises to be a cinematic thrill ride, while multiplayer is shaping up to be the franchise's deepest, most rewarding, and most engaging to date. And, of course, zombies. There is a dedicated narrative built specifically for an all-new, enigmatic, zombie-loaded experience. These three core modes of play will fuel Treyarch's dystopic take on how the progression of technology might just lead us into a world where only those who risk going too far will find out how far they can actually go. On this third episode of Conversations with Creators, I will sit down and discuss the next iteration of the iconic Call of Duty Black Ops franchise with Treyarch studio head Mark Lamia, game director of Campaign and Zombies Jason Blundell, multiplayer game director Dan Bunting, and studio design director David Vonderhaar. We are here today to talk specifically about the Call of Duty franchise and also Black Ops 3, which we saw debuted at E3 that I'm super excited about. One of the things that I thought was really cool is that you've been together basically since the beginning of this franchise. And you have worked over different types of hardware and through different system architectures. And I would love to learn from you, what has that been like? Like going back, we're going back over 10 years now. So, how have you seen the industry change? How have expectations from your audience changed? And what have you done to keep up with that?
Yeah, I was there from the inception of Call of Duty, and it was, we were very much inspired by what was done in some of the movies that we'd seen, some of those World War II epic cinematic movies, or even shows like the Band of Brothers.
Right, because you came out right around that Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers time, and yeah.
And that was very influential, and we wanted to bring that sort of cinematic experience. As the hardware has capabilities have increased, I think it's allowed us to, as artists, be able to express ourselves, to realize our visions with greater fidelity, and really truly realize everything from the artistry to the animation to the sound design to all the design aspirations. And the Sony PlayStation 4 is an incredible piece of hardware, and the kinds of things that we can do on this next generation of hardware is truly amazing, and really allows us the freedom to almost create anything we want.
It's really interesting because, on the early kind of consoles, going back to, well, not that early, but PS2 and those kind of things, we have a term in the industry, smoke and mirrors, right? This idea of, especially on the campaign side, what we're trying to do is make you feel a certain way or kind of put you in a certain perspective. Mm-hmm. Be it kind of the closeness with your comrades doing something, the intensity, the claustrophobic, or the expanse and the space of things. In the past, we'd always have those desires, those needs to tell those kind of stories, but hardware was limited as well. You can't draw infinite ranges, or you can't do every blade of grass. And so we take more of an impressionist painter kind of mentality. I need you to feel like there's every blade of grass, even though I can't actually render every blade of grass.
Yeah.
So you'd have to do these tricks You'd have to do this, and it's always a balancing act in terms of, what's the most important thing you want to show at that moment, and then hence, where do you want to spend your GPU or CPU chips, right?
Sure, yeah.
So
do you find now that without those limitations that you would have had, back maybe 10 years ago, is that harder?
It's fun, isn't it? Like, because you think about Jaws, right?
Yeah.
It costs a lot more money.
If the shark had worked, it would have been a very different movie.
Yeah.
Right? In the same way, I think some of the great things
That's right.
that we did in those early games with limited hardware forced us to take creative choices and creative bents. But maybe if we'd had the full power, we wouldn't have got there.
We're not as limited by that. Our technology is powerful enough. But yes, on the performance side, like one of the things about Call of Duty is it's so important how it feels. So even though we can make it look however we want, we're always balanced. It's always the balancing act of making sure it runs at like 60 frames per second and it feels there's a connected feeling to the game that players have with it.
Yeah, I mean, constraints are good. We always talk about how constraints are limiting, but they're also the things that force you into those hard decisions like Jason was talking about. And we've always, especially coming from a multiplayer angle, we have a lot of constraints because we're trying to make this game that looks as amazing as possible and also is very balanced and competitive and actually create a better gameplay experience for our fans.
I had read in my research for this that you took a sound team out into different environments and fired a bunch of different weapons. And I don't know if this is interesting to the kids at home, but it's super interesting to me. But what I really want to know is, where did that decision come from?
It's something we've done from the very earliest parts of this franchise to be able to take out the weapons that we're either creating or inspired by, and to be able to put them in a canyon. And they're firing everything off from pistols to high caliber weaponry and everything in between, and they're capturing it all, right? But not only just for the sounds that those make, but it's really the artistry that goes on after that. And we go inside the sound room and they put together these other sounds, everything
They layer them in to get different kinds of metal reaction sounds that kind of give a broader sort of palette to that.
One of the fun things they did was they took cars and lifted them up with cranes and then dropped them onto other cars.
So that was my favorite thing to sign off on. We had Brian Toohey, our sound designer, came up to us and he goes, and I get this thing that comes across my desk and it says, we're gonna go out to the junkyard and drop cars. And
That's like, dear 10-year-old me, guess what you get paid to do someday?
And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna talk to him. This isn't one of those ones I'm just gonna sign off on. So I'm gonna say, look, so what are we doing out there? And he's like, Mark, there's just nothing like the sound that you can get with metal crunching, with glass breaking, we really need that when these cars and the vehicles explode in the game. I really want to get that experience. If I could just drop cars, I think I could capture the right amount of sounds. So just speaking as like a boy who was once a destructive child, awesome.
But one of the things people are constantly talking about with your games is how there is such realism to it.
The weapons team's process is actually, they have a very scienced out method in how they develop the weapons, both creatively and from a technology and art point of view. In the past, we've even written up personality bios for each weapon. So there's a whole process that goes into just concepting each weapon and each weapon's personality out. We like to have these very big personalities to all of our gameplay content so that each one is distinct from the other.
So when you're looking at that sort of thing, you're looking at future design like that, do you work with someone who will say, so look, I forecast the future, and I can look at the way weapons have advanced over the last 20 years. This is how we expect them to advance over the last 60 years. So your weapon should look like this? Or is it more like, look, it's my game. I want this. I think it's cool. So let's kind of back into this is what it would actually do.
So the technology of the time is something that we've researched. We research extensively, and we have worked with experts and futurists. Just more so for the technology of the time. But when you're talking about something as intimate as the weapon in a first-person shooter, and these are people who've been creating weapons, obviously historical weapons, up until largely until Black Ops 2, really, for almost a decade. These guys are expert weapon designers. So everything about the weapon, it goes through so many iterations. Even if you've never seen this weapon before, if you know anything about weapons, this is almost like, it could be a real weapon. Everything has function, real life function. Every moving piece is animated. Every part of this has been thought of as though it is a real weapon. in our historical games used to appreciate that on this authenticity. I think people will appreciate the detail that goes into how we realize those future things. But there's all kinds of future technology on the battlefield, not just weapons. And look, we have our own internal debates. Some of this stuff we'll push out a little bit further, and get a little more creative with. And some of this stuff feels a little bit more like, this looks like this is the next version of X type of weapon.
As a game designer, you're very focused on the game tuning of the weapons and making sure there's a good broad portfolio and that they fit into a power band. And the weapon artists are, of course, trying to make something that seems like a believable weapon that would exist. And you're like, that's how it would reload in the future. I'm like, yeah, but it reloads too slow, and so how are we going to fix that?
Because you're concerned about game balance for players.
So from a purely game design point of view, you're very concerned about that stuff. So there's always this really intense mix between the art and the design and the technology and the sound design as well, and how all of those come together at a table to make a really smart, proper decision about the game.
You spend a lot of time addressing the multiplayer aspects of these games, and everyone knows you have a very passionate community of super dedicated game players, and I would imagine that you have to create what is effectively a level playing field that allows an individual player's skill to decide what team's going to triumph.
Well, it's a tremendous process. So, you want the game to be quite accessible, and we work very hard so that any gamer could put their hands on the controller and start playing, and trying to provide an experience for players who feel like they can constantly improve. And I think that's what helps Treyarch Call of Duty games just in general have some legs after they come out, is because there's a lot to master over time, and that comes from that skill gap and that skill planning. So you want players to feel successful always, or feel like they can get involved and be successful and not be frustrated by that. But you also have to provide the challenges along the way to keep them invested. And it's actually a very conscious kind of design, philosophy that we have and we work against. And we do it in all sorts of ways, with how you unlock content, in what order, all the way up to the game modes and the difficulties between them. And you're working to try to provide an experience for players that can outline over a period of time.
I'm very interested to know what you would consider to be sort of the DNA of your organization, of your team, that is constant through the inception of one of your titles, all the way through to shipping, and then also maintaining it once it's out, and how you choose to put out DLC for it and keep the games kind of growing and alive, and how you address being super successful, but not just getting complacent.
In our case, we talk about always trying to do the best work of our careers, the best work of our lives, each and every time. It is literally the reason to do it again, especially if you've already seen success, like I said, which we're fortunate to have. Otherwise, you do get complacent. It's why, Black Ops 2 is different. It's clearly Call of Duty, and there's clearly some of the DNA in our Black Ops franchise. Each of our games is creatively very different, and I think that's the other part of it. It's like, you want to do the best work of your life. You can say that till you're blue in the face, but I think the way you do that with people who are accomplished is you challenge them. You give them truly creatively challenging assignments, then you push like you've never pushed before, and you have to create a trusting and a creative environment. If you're going to stand around and critique each other, people have to be able to trust that criticism is coming from a good place, that the reason why Dan's telling me something's not good enough is because he wants the best for the game. And not only that Dan's going to stay and help me, get to that next place. And I think that's certainly the culture that we try to foster inside of Treyarch, is stop looking to the outside for any kind of validation. Set your own benchmarks. You're going to do something great. And when you do something great, the rest of the world will hopefully take care of itself. And that's not to say that we don't listen to our fans, because there's a whole part of our game that literally exists because of our fans that we can talk about. But
let's talk about it.
Okay, well, let's talk about it. We make a very social game. The multiplayer game is incredibly social, and our fans love it. But one part of the game that literally only exists because of our fans is our zombies.
Yeah.
It was a passion project inside the studio that totally should never have, in any sort of I probably shouldn't even be here as a studio head, because I let this thing happen at a time when the development was strained and the team was, in a difficult place trying to release a historically authentic cinematic World War II game. And then you hear, have you heard they threw a zombie in there? It's a Nazi zombie, right? Everyone likes to kill Nazi zombies. So, it's a fun new game co-op mode. And I'm like, whoa. This hasn't been greenlit. What's going on, You got to try.
Did you just sort of start moonlighting on zombies? And you were just like, you know what, I have this idea and I'm just basically going to beg forgiveness? Is that where that came from?
I mean, the studio itself, I mean, it was, as Mark was saying, it kind of comes from the guys having a passion to create it and just kind of toying things around and playing with stuff. And then putting it in front of Mark and kind of showing it and saying, okay, the temperature was good. Okay, it's all good. Yeah. And then I think Mark then went on a process of introducing it to our publisher bit by bit.
We actually learned like a really valuable lesson about how to internally market features that were controversial through that process, because that was our first co-op experience as a team, making a game that was cooperative, and we were just it was a thing that evolved over time as we were making the campaign game for co-op. Mm-hmm. We just learned and discovered that hey, the most fun experiences are when you're defending and you're defending together and you're playing these kind of defense missions.
Yeah,
and that just was like, we should just make a mode that is just about defending and having waves of attackers, and that was where it kind of started, and then. The zombie portion came in because one of our missions was based on the Peleliu Island, where a bunch of airstrikes had come in. So we went to mocap, and we motion captured all of these walking wounded soldiers. So they're all kind of like hobbling around and injured. And one of our lead scripters at the time on the campaign, he started to plug that in and say, it's a little bit more fun when there's zombies in there, when they're soldiers. Yeah. And he started to, add some layers to the mechanic, put some, started to put the windows that you could repair and the wall buys.
Yeah.
And as we started to build this game out,
all different departments start climbing in. After they're crunched at night, like the sound team starts putting in, the animation team starts putting in. It was total grassroots.
It just started. People started playing it on the team, and it just started kind of
in the middle of the night.
More people got aware.
They should have been going home to get sleep. They had me play it, and I was like, "Oh, this is a lot of fun. I'm gonna have to figure." Now I've got the problem of figuring out how to support the team to get it done. Yeah. So I just did the exact same thing. I literally, wouldn't give it too much of a preamble. I just sit down with people and have them play with me. And isn't this fun? And just get them actually emotionally invested in what it was. But that only goes so far in business, because this is as I talked to you about the origins of this thing, this is a authentic, cinematic experience inside of a historical setting. In this case, and World at War was a very intense, brutal, serious, World War II game.
Yeah.
And there's some people who are like, you're not sticking zombies in Call of Duty. I mean, what are you talking about? Have you lost your mind, man?
Yeah.
The thing about it was, we made this deal with Activision, who owns Treyarch and is our publisher, that it wouldn't get marketed. We wouldn't market this. It's okay. Mm-hmm. Let us release it as an Easter egg. After everyone's already experienced the artfully crafted, beautiful Call of Duty game that we've been working on for years. Let them experience that game. After the credits roll, we'll have this little surprise at the end. It's a lot of fun. I think people will enjoy it.
Yeah.
So they let us do that. And I think that very decision to actually not, and it's a very un-Call of Duty-like thing in this world to do, if you think about it, not promote it, not market it at all. Mm-hmm. The people who found it, who'd already got what they bargained for, they played their game, and they took it, they owned it, and that very same internet blew it up for us.
Yeah.
They took it, they got to own it.
The fans of your game getting so excited about that it blows up, it becomes its own thing. Their support, their passion leads to...
It becomes a main part of what a Treyarch Call of Duty game, what a Treyarch Black Ops game is.
Yeah.
It takes center stage as part of what Black Ops, when we shipped Black Ops, it had an epic campaign, it had an awesome multiplayer, and it had a zombies that came with it and just became part of what we make when we make our Call of Duty games.
Yeah.
It's a legitimate
its own
pillar
thing.
on the disc, and it kind of, from those humble kind of beginnings, in terms of what's fun, what's engaging, to the point now where it's getting allocations and it's getting resources in the studio, so we're developing it, which are just as long and just as weighty as other things. And you have to, with DLC and digital content and stuff and so forth, consider it like a campaign, consider it like a full story. It
has a 7-year story arc for its characters that we've been going on with this journey that will...
And I think that's something that you'll actually be interested in hearing, is that the story for zombies didn't always exist. There was not this comprehensive and forethought put into what this story was going to be from start to finish.
Yeah.
We had very little fiction around it. I mean, the very first iteration of zombies was literally hobbled together from things that we found from other parts of the game.
They were mute characters, right?
Yeah.
They didn't speak.
Yeah.
They didn't have any personality in that sense, right?
But the community started to pick up on little hints of things in the game. And there were some intentional Easter eggs that were put around, but there were also some ones that we didn't actually place that the fans started to have these conspiracy theories around just what does that mean? And they would fight with one another about what things meant.
There was one example which was it was a texture that was warped. Just warped at the corner, right? And they found it, they came in on it, and it was like finding a deity on your toast, It was like, oh wow, they're like, they're saying something here, that's like a demon or something, and that's because he's meddling in other powers, and it was just that we warped the texture. But we saw that kind of interest going, and it was like, we should actually do more of this stuff, deliberately,
We asked our PlayStation Nation if there were things that they wanted to know specifically, and I think it would suck out loud if I didn't get to one of the questions that we selected from our PlayStation readers. So PSN ID Reaper3712,
Like that name.
great name, would like to know, what can the hardcore players expect to see in the Black Ops 3 multiplayer?
Yeah, so this is probably referring to hardcore, the game mode variant. This is a game mode where we usually have reduced health, and there's usually no HUD. That's usually what when they talk to hardcore, that's what they're referring about. So we're very aware that the hardcore community exists. We still have hardcore game modes. It's still very much a part of the game. And when we get closer to launch and talking about game modes, we'll be in a better position to talk about specifically which game modes will be natively hardcore. You will definitely be able to play all game modes in hardcore, and then there will be certain playlists that allow you to play that mode natively in hardcore. And as you might expect, we're probably going to go through the process of which ones are the most popular in hardcore and make sure that those are accessible so all the hardcore players can find each other and play together. That's really what we want to do.
Yeah, and we'll have a real robust custom games for people who like to do private matches and be able to set up whatever rules they want.
One of the things you guys always talk about with Call of Duty is choice. You talk about choice for gamers, and that's really coming up over and over and over again with Black Ops 3. Would you talk about some of the things that you might be bringing to 3 that we've never seen before?
With the co-op campaign, first time in a while, last one was ours actually, World at War. Bringing 4 players in, we wanted to be able to give you personality, be able to give you kind of choice on who you are. So there's obviously but the idea of customizing your character, that's first for the campaign. It's customizing the character, detailing them out, choosing the face, choosing the kind of the gear. Then you also have this concept of a safe house, an area between levels. So historically, missions would just go one into the next. But this is being told over more like a week and a half time period. So you actually go back to the safe house and prep before you go to the next mission. So that area, your bunk area, you can customize. You can put things on the wall that you find in the missions. You can change your flag, right? You can change the persona of who you are. As people join your co-op game, their bunk's open with their bunk in there. So if they then disconnect, that would close, and if someone else joined it, open up.
Oh, that's really cool.
Right? That's just the aesthetics part, right? But showing off medals, bragging rights, right? What you've done, these items that you've found in different levels. Then you can kind of go out into that safe house and choose your weapon. So with leveling up and progression, pick the base weapon, attachments, how much you're playing it and how much you're using that weapon allows you to pimp that out more, apply paint patterns to that as well, customize it, personalize it in that way. And then we have this concept of cyber cores. Because you're a cybernetic soldier, you've been enhanced or augmented, you have these 3 cores that then have a list of abilities associated with them. So picking them, upgrading them, allows you to then customize it and change what kind of equipment and abilities you can take to the battlefield.
That's great. So if I start out thinking I want to be this type of player, and I realize I'm not really having that much fun being this type of player, I can take that thing out and put in a new thing and not be stuck with it.
Yeah, you can have multiple loadouts. So actually during the mission, you can go to a loadout container and say, listen, I brought my long-range stuff. I was going with a sniper rifle. I was using this kind of chaos ability to kind of take robots out. And actually I found out that I want to do more close combat. It's humans close combat. Oh, I've got my human close combat loadout here. Let me just change to that. Okay, I'm going to do rapid strike now. I'm going to jump in and be hitting guys and then shotgunning them at close range. And then the team as well can look at each other's loadout and set up before they go into a mission so they can configure themselves appropriately.
Do you all have a favored class and a favored style, or do you really need to, everybody's got to be familiar with everything because you just sort of need to be able to engage in conversation with anyone regardless of what their loadout is?
Here's the absolute truth. You encourage everybody on the team to use everything so you can get the widest range of feedback and information about that. And that works right up until they don't do so well, and then they revert to the habits of what makes them successful as players. So, this is why things like public betas, which Call of Duty Black Ops 3 multiplayer will have, are important to us so that you can get a wide swath of information and data that will help feed that sort of playtest feedback. Everybody wants to be better than their fellow player on the competitive side anyway. You certainly see a lot of diversity on the campaign players, but even then, people just rally around things that they worked on or are passionate about. And it's just, we're still gamers, right? So even though you're a game maker, it's hard to beat over being a
test
gamer.
team.
Yeah, that's right.
And I don't rely on them to test the game. Otherwise, it would just be like,
we're biased.
whatever your favorite thing would be awesome.
But that said, we do, for multiplayer, we play test it every single day with the team because it's a game that you can't really play solo.
Of course.
So you have to the team has to play it together to iterate and understand what the problems are and solve them creatively. I myself play like probably 3 to 4 times a week, and I deliberately try to pick different things every time to get a sense of what that experience is going to be across a wide variety of our fan base.
When I had Bungie here and we were talking about Destiny, there was this very clear divide between the guys who thought shotguns were great and the guys who thought long-range weapons were great. Do you have any divides like that internally at the studio?
Any one-shot kill weapon like a sniper rifle or a shotgun at close range is very controversial, just period. It's hard to balance something that's a one-shot kill. Where's the skill gap? Where's the curve? Right, so this is when we try to mix the emotion of playing and making games with the data of making games, and you let the data, sort of gauge your emotional reaction to those things, and that's the only really logistical way to deal with that particular challenge. Is we have performance metrics. We expect players to perform at this level, and you can measure against that. So when you're using a shotgun or a sniper rifle, you can say, look, it's over or under indexing against what you'd expect, and that's how you deal with that. And believe me, every time we increase a shotgun's power or decrease a shotgun's power, people show up and knock on the door, and they're quite angry for a day.
They actually just yell.
That's actually very interesting to me because what you're talking about is that basic fundamental skill level that you are developing for isn't static. It's kind of constantly moving, and you have to be responding to that all the time.
It does change over time. Now we try to set that base for the development, right? You have to set a baseline for the development, and you're only working with and playing with mostly other developers in QA, so you have a limited amount of data, right? There's good players and bad players, even within our own building. It's a very big studio. So
Why'd you look at me when you said bad players?
But over time, when the game comes out, and we're very fortunate that there's a lot of people who play. So over time, it absolutely does changes, and you do have to adapt to those changes over time. The truth is, something will climb out of or into a power band that we don't expect it, and we have to make the change. And it's controversial every time, but we will make that same decision every time because it's the right thing to do for the game.
How do you anticipate the public beta in Black Ops 3 affecting that whole process?
So what the public beta really does is it actually amplifies the amount of information we have to measure if the things are performing the way that we want. So it's actually fantastic. As a game designer and developer, it's the best thing that you want that. You want to put the game in the best possible position, and you don't want to guess. I don't want to guess if it's balanced. I want to know if it's balanced.
Yeah. It's super interesting to me as like a math and statistics nerd to see what that must look like when you take this, this sample and compare it to this sample and hope that your basic metrics kind of line up in the same way.
Yeah, so fortunately for us, this is the third of the Black Ops games. So we've been building up the analytics over time, building up the dashboards over time. The good thing is I don't have to guess.
And the game, and as you said, we've been doing this for a while, so each time the engineers have instrumented our code better. Each time we always learn something. It sounds like it's a lot of it's numbers, some of it is actual feel.
Sure.
As well. There's that.
It's art and science.
It really is. You can't just rely on the numbers. It's all about how it feels too.
Yeah, on the campaign side, it's because we have a greater latitude because we can customize what's coming at you and when it's coming at you, right? And even though now we have our new AI system, which then is far more intelligent and has more emergent behavior in terms of how it moves around the space. And we had to create that because now with 4 players...
Emergent equals unpredictable.
Of course.
Yeah, you have to get around that. But here's the thing. Sometimes we want you to be overwhelmed. The MP, it's a configuration. And for campaign, it's like, okay, I'm going to put you in a situation where you do need to have a shotgun, or I'm putting you in a situation where it's more advantageous to have the sniper rifle deliberately at that moment in time.
Yeah, the AI doesn't complain if the guns are overpowered.
It does not. It does not.
Maybe you need to work on an AI that just complains about everything you do. Like that
sends us tweets.
Black Ops 3 is effectively going to be 3 games coming out all at one time. You're developing in parallel. inevitably you have to overlap at places. So how do you allocate that?
Fortunately, the development, it's a complex development. There's over 300 developers working on it just inside of Treyarch, and that doesn't include all the talented contractors we work with and things like that in the outside world. And it has to be orchestrated. It's a very complex production where we try and make sure that each part of the game is getting the resources at the right time that it needs. And then sometimes it's just an all-out brawl. No, it is definitely difficult at times. I mean, we run into it quite often where each part of the team actually has the need for the same resources. And, honestly, I got a team of, honestly, the hardest working people I've ever known who have done as much as they can to make sure that no part of our game sort of goes without. But it is a team that's been making this game now for a long time, and so
those moments of contention. We were mentioning before about the limitations forcing you to make good decisions, right?
Yes.
Those contentions, I think, also do that, right? You have these moments where MP or zombies or campaign are kind of struggling for an asset. So then the group has to come together and say, you know what, this is kind of something we should standardize. This is something we should have across all three modes. And so as a byproduct of that, I feel we've kind of got a greater synergy between all three now. So that isn't only a benefit for the end consumer, because what they'll see is a common language and interface that they're moving through.
And that's been powerful because Black Ops 3 is finally all three of those games that you talked about, campaign, co-op campaign in this case, zombies, and multiplayer coming together to be one online game. So from a game design point of view, we are integrated more so than the previous two games in the sub-franchise for sure. And it really sets the tone for, I think, where Treyarch can go.
And there's ideas that come out of that too for sharing. Just, somebody might make a mechanic or a weapon for a specific type of level or encounter in campaign that might inspire some new idea in multiplayer that we hadn't thought of from at a systems level, and get it a little bit more so it can work in a sandbox type of setting, and then that gets transferred back over to the campaign use. And so there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of sharing. There's a lot of that kind of cross-pollination that comes out of it.
And still equally creative on their own merits. It's not forced. We don't shove it down anybody's throats in any way. If it makes sense for the game, we do it. We talk about it. Sometimes they're painful conversations. Sometimes they're easy.
It's turning into like a melting pot. I mean, especially we're in our kind of last stages right now of development, but it's very much a melting pot of things moving, because as things become finalized, there's a fluidity in the system because, as Dave mentioned, everything's connected together. The thing that's just really nice right now is that there is that freedom to do it. I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head.
So I've got one.
Oh, you got one?
So Black Ops 3 multiplayer has a new feature called Specialist, which is each character. There's 9 characters you can play with the game. You can unlock them as you progress through the multiplayer experience. Each one has their own voice, their own personality, their own backstory, their own unique look. And I would say that the Specialist feature would not have existed if we hadn't spent so much time trying to build those kind of archetypal characters for the campaign in that early day. We've never really built fiction into multiplayer before. This is kind of a new sort of layer for us to add into multiplayer, and just how much time we developed the backstory of the world, the world building of our game universe, allowed us to sort of pluck these kind of interesting parallel stories that weren't necessarily directly happening in the campaign, but they were happening in the world around that. And it was just like, hey, there's a lot of really cool ideas here that we can go to create these awesome characters.
As a storyteller, it makes my heart sing that there's more narrative coming into the multiplayer.
Yeah, of course.
And the same way, likewise, with more systems kind of coming into campaign.
The cybercore stuff in co-op campaign is very multiplayer in a way, right? Being able to load out and take the choices and pick them and take it in, and so the battle plays differently based on those things.
It has been such an incredible pleasure to talk with all of you guys. I have so many other things I want to talk to you about, but I'm real excited. I hope everyone at home has enjoyed this. Black Ops 3 ships when?
On November 6th.
I love that you can specialize. That's great. I've always liked that. Yeah.
Something we've been trying to figure out how to do for a while.
Yeah, 'cause we have this created class feature that is just, it's just sort of ingrained in Call of Duty at this point, because it gives players customization over their class loadouts. It defines their playstyle, basically.
Yeah.
And with that kind of system, it's so flexible and open-ended that you can't take that away. You have to always have that. But we like these, kind of RPG sort of elements, these archetypal decisions that players would have to make in the game. And so we've always kind of played with the idea. We've never really figured out how to do it right.
It's one of the hard parts about working on a franchise, right? give me more, but don't take away anything I don't like. Yeah. Change it, but don't change it too much, right? It's something. It's one of the unique challenges of working on such an established franchise.
It is so freaking hard to find that balance. Like, well, yeah, you know what? That's actually a legitimate thing that maybe we should think about, and nothing we do is going to be good enough for this guy.
Yeah, and you have to live with yourself with it. You have to live with yourself when you upset that dude. You know, but keep going.
Yeah.
Like those guys, the vocal minority, they are very vocal.
Yeah.
But you can't have one without the other. You can't you can't just get all the good passion.
Yeah.
Passion and
Yeah. Well, I mean, passion is passion.
Right? You know what?
Like, that's great.
PlayStation